I spent 14 years building the system that saved my company millions, but when I asked for a 13% raise, they laughed and called me replaceable. What they didn't know was that I held every piece of proof and an offer from their biggest competitor. Within weeks, I brought down the arrogant CEO's empire. Let me start from the beginning. I balanced the heavy binder against my hip, its edge pressing into my arm as I walked into Richard Grayson's corner office. The place looked more like a showroom than a workspace. Glass, steel, everything polished within an inch of its life, as if designed for someone who never lifted a finger. I'd spent 15 years building Nova Freight's supply chains, creating algorithms that trimmed hours off delivery routes and saved the company millions. All I wanted now was a 13% raise, a fair trade for a decade and a half of late nights, missed weekends, and sacrifices that no one else would have made. I placed the binder on his desk, every chart crisp, every page highlighted to perfection, and said calmly, "Richard, I'm asking for a 13% raise. Here's the proof of my work, and here are the results." He leaned back in his leather chair, a grin stretching across his face before exploding into loud, unrestrained laughter. He laughed so hard his shoulders shook, and the sound carried past the glass walls for everyone to hear. "You're replaceable, Emma," he said between chuckles. "If you think you're worth more, go find it somewhere else." Heat burned up my neck, but I steadied myself, grabbed the binder, and headed for the door. Through the glass I caught Lauren at the front desk, pretending to shuffle papers even though her flushed cheeks gave her away. She had heard everything, and so had everyone else. I forced my steps steady back to my cubicle, set the binder down with a heavy thud, and just then my inbox pinged with a new email. Company newsletter. Nova lands Silver Ridge deal. Thanks to CEO's vision, the headline read. I opened it and scanned page after page, each one crediting Richard for efficiencies and milestones that were mine alone. My jaw tightened until it hurt. As I closed the newsletter, one last image burned into my mind, a draft contract on his screen with a consultant who just happened to be a board member's nephew. My stomach knotted. He hadn't just dismissed me, he was already lining up my replacement. I shut my laptop slowly, the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights pressing in, and felt something inside me harden. The tech wing used to be alive with chatter, keyboards clicking, engineers trading ideas. Now it was so quiet I could hear the hum of the lights overhead. 20 engineers had once filled these desks. Now only 3 of us remained, the rest made obsolete by the very systems I had built. Efficiency had been my mission, and I had delivered, but staring at that binder, I wondered if I had engineered myself out of existence. Another email appeared. Another newsletter plastered with Richard's smug face and the words, "Revolutionary Vision in Supply Chain Efficiency." Every statistic quoted, every success story highlighted, every phrase recycled. They were all mine. I clicked it shut before Bile Mercer any higher. That evening, I returned to my modest townhouse, the place colder than usual. I reheated leftovers and ate at the kitchen counter, the silence broken only by the faint tick of the wall clock. I remembered my late husband, Michael, telling me during one of my Genathon coding nights, "Someday, they'll see what you've built." I pressed my fork into the plate, realizing no one at Nova ever truly had. The anger that settled in me wasn't loud, it was steady, quiet, and unshakable. The next morning I carried that fire back to the office. At my desk, I unlocked the bottom drawer I'd kept closed for years, the small key always safe on my car ring. Inside was a worn black notebook, its edges frayed, corners bent, cover soft from years of use. I opened it to find handwritten algorithms, diagrams, server logs, and time-stamped experiments, records of sleepless nights spent on my personal laptop long before Nova ever touched the work. This wasn't company property. This was mine. My evidence. My leverage. My safety net. I slid the notebook into my bag, its weight grounding me, reminding me of where my true foundation really lay. That night, long after the house had gone still, I sat on the edge of my bed scrolling through saved voicemails I hadn't bothered with in months. Most were junk, appointment reminders, spam, a message from my sister about Thanksgiving. Then one stopped me cold. Dated 6 months earlier, from Michael Mercer, COO of Apex Logistics. Hi, Emma. We met at the Vegas Expo. Still impressed by your demo. If you ever want to make a move, the offer stands. My chest tightened as I replayed it. I remembered him clearly, sharp, yes, but also genuinely attentive. He had asked real questions and listened as if my work mattered, the exact opposite of Richard Grayson smirking across his desk. I hesitated, thumb hovering over the call button, half expecting the number to be dead or an assistant to answer. But on the second ring, his voice came through, warm and unhurried. Emma Donovan, I've been hoping you'd call. Are you free tonight? Michael's voice carried an easy confidence that stayed with me as, 3 hours later, I slid into a leather booth at a quiet downtown steakhouse. The place smelled of oak smoke and charred beef, the kind of spot where deals were sealed in low voices and eye contact, not in sterile cafeterias with corporate slogans plastered on the walls like Richard Grayson preferred. When Michael stood to shake my hand, it was firm, genuine, like greeting an old ally rather than a potential recruit. We ordered quickly, and once the first sip of bourbon burned a trail down my throat, he leaned forward, no pretense in his voice. I'll be straight with you, Emma. We tried to reverse engineer your routing system. We failed. It's airtight. My pulse kicked hard, though I kept my face calm, my hand swirling the bourbon as if I had all the time in the world. Then he said the words I didn't expect to hear. We don't just want the system. We want you. Full leadership. Build it your way, no interference. The sting of Richard's mocking laughter was still raw in my memory, and now here sat someone treating my work like the key to an empire. Michael didn't hedge, didn't soften the pitch. Here's the package. Triple your current salary, full benefits, stock options, and the authority to hire your own team. We're not after a cog, we're after a builder. I set the glass down, a faint ring marking the coaster, and steadied my voice. On one condition. What's mine comes with me, no committees burying me in the back office again. He studied me, then smiled, not arrogant, but certain. Agreed. Legal will handle everything. You're not a figurehead, Emma. You're the builder. Something inside me shifted at those words, as if I had been holding my breath for years. The restaurant air seemed lighter, easier to breathe. Later, driving beneath the Denver skyline, city lights scattered across the dark horizon, guilt edged in. I thought of Lauren at the front desk with her nervous smiles, Jenna in operations who never quite trusted me but still depended on my systems, and the handful of younger staff who survived after my algorithms gutted our department. Walking away felt like abandoning them to Richard's sinking ship. But then I heard his laughter again in my mind, cruel and dismissive, and I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. I couldn't keep bleeding for a company that thrived on my silence. The next morning, I opened a blank document and poured out the words of my resignation. Sharp. Final. I printed it, slid the page into an envelope, and pressed the seal until it held. It felt light as paper yet heavy as judgment. Without knocking, I stepped into Richard's office. He was hunched over his laptop, Bluetooth in his ear, a half-eaten muffin sweating on a napkin beside him. The performance of importance, nothing more. I placed the envelope squarely on his desk. The sound wasn't loud, but it cut clean through the staged productivity. He muttered, "Give me a second," still typing, until the silence pressed him to look. As his eyes skimmed the first line, the color drained from his face. "You're leaving, after all we've built?" I met his stare steady. "We? You mean what I built?" His lips parted, then closed. Panic set in. He tossed desperate offers into the air, more money, a leadership title, something he called a partner role, but each word fell flat, too late, too empty. I kept my tone calm. "My new offer triples my salary. It comes with stock and my own team." He leaned back, rattled, gripping the armrest. "So it's about money?" I shook my head. "No, it's about value. You said I was replaceable. You were wrong." For once, Richard had no clever retort. I turned on my heel and walked toward the door. At the front desk, Lauren looked up. This time she didn't drop her eyes. Instead, she gave me the faintest smile, small but solid, like a quiet round of applause from the sidelines. I carried that smile with me down the corridor, the resignation letter already unraveling Richard Grayson's illusion of control. Less than 24 hours later, HR summoned me by email. Subject line, exit meeting required. I walked into the windowless conference room thinking it would be routine, just signatures and formalities, but the tension in the air said otherwise. Henry Winslow, Nova's legal counsel, sat stiff in his chair, his tie pulled too tight, his expression rehearsed to the point of stiffness. Without so much as a greeting, he slid a heavy stack of papers across the table. Standard exit package, he said flatly. Non-disclosure, return of property, arbitration agreement, and non-compete. My eyes caught on the word non-compete, something that had never been in my original contract. That's new, I said, raising a brow. It's policy now. Everyone signs, he replied, monotone and unyielding. I leaned back, letting silence settle between us, then slowly reached into my bag. The black notebook landed on the table, its frayed edges and worn cover looking defiant against the pristine white contracts. I opened it and turned the pages, handwritten algorithms, server logs, diagrams, annotations stretching back years, all built on my time, my machines, my home server. If you want to fight ownership in court, be my guest, I said, voice even. Henry's hand hesitated as he flipped through the notebook, his brow furrowing, his mouth flattening into a thin line. I watched as recognition crept across his face, then unease, and finally something that looked close to fear. He closed it carefully, like the pages might explode. Fine, he muttered, voice low, just the NDA. No non-compete. I signed only what was clean, the pen gliding steady across the pages, no hesitation, no second thoughts. Sliding the stack back toward him, I felt not compliance, but triumph. When I Mercer from the chair and slipped the notebook back into my bag, my steps out of that sterile room were lighter than they had been in years. Even the air in the hallway felt sharper, clearer, as though I had finally cut loose the weight that had buried me. My first morning at Apex was like stepping into an entirely different universe. The building was sleek glass and steel, yes, but the energy pulsed with life instead of artifice. Reception greeted me by name, my badge already waiting, and on the third floor I found a frosted door etched with my title, Emma Donovan, Director of Systems Innovation. Inside, 5 desks formed a semicircle, young engineers looking up with bright, curious eyes. I set my bag down, rolled up my sleeves, and finally spoke the words I'd been holding back for years. Let's get to work. Weeks blurred into long days and late nights, but this time every hour felt like building something that truly belonged to me. No second guessing. No stolen credit. We built together, and for the first time, I wasn't shielding someone else's ego, I was leading a team. 6 weeks later, we launched. The switch flipped cleanly. No crashes, no downtime, no panicked phone calls. Within 2 weeks, delivery speeds Mercer 33%, fuel costs dropped, and warehouse bottlenecks all but disappeared. My inbox overflowed with proof, numbers that confirmed what I'd always known. My system worked. One afternoon, Michael stepped into my office with a folder. He placed it in front of me, Nova stats stacked against Apex's in black and red. The difference was undeniable. Ready to take Silver Ridge from them? He asked, his voice calm but edged with fire. I didn't even need to answer. The data spoke for me. Within days, Apex signed a 5-year exclusive contract with Silver Ridge Manufacturing, Nova's crown jewel. The very deal Richard had paraded as his greatest triumph now carried Apex's name. Industry headlines exploded like a detonation, Apex's Mikhaili replacing Nova's in every circle where I had once been invisible. And I knew it was only a matter of time before Richard felt the tremor. The morning after the announcement, my phone buzzed with his name. I let it ring. By noon there were 3 missed calls. By evening, 6. I silenced the notifications, but the vibrations still crawled under my skin. 2 nights later, I left Apex late, the garage nearly empty, my heels echoing against concrete when a shadow moved near my truck. Richard stepped out, disheveled, tie loosened, blazer wrinkled, his practiced veneer gone. "Talk to me, Emma," he said, voice raw in a way I'd never heard. Hundreds of jobs are at risk. You can't just walk away like this. The cold night air stung as I stopped a few feet from him, and for one brief moment, I almost saw the man he wanted me to believe he was, the leader burdened by responsibility. But then I remembered his laughter, the way he had mocked me, dismissed me, called me replaceable. I didn't take anything from you, Richard, I said, steady. You just never valued what you had. His mouth opened, then closed, no words left to salvage his pride. His shoulders slumped, gray streaks at his temples visible under the flickering light. I walked past him without another word. His footsteps never followed. The headlines practically wrote themselves. Nova's stock tumbled fast, plunging nearly 64% before the quarter even closed. Layoffs hit every corner of the company. Operations, admin, warehousing, and texts from old colleagues started trickling in. Some were bitter, others shocked, most simply terrified. When the official announcement came, it wasn't grand or theatrical. No carefully staged LinkedIn post, no glossy handshake photo. Just a flat press release. Richard Grayson had resigned as CEO of Nova Freight Systems. I read it once, then closed the tab. The silence that followed wasn't Michaeli. It felt heavier, like the ground shifting beneath all of us. A week later, an envelope landed on my desk at Apex with a dull thud. Court summons. Nova Freight Systems versus Emma Donovan. The charge: theft of proprietary intellectual property. I read the words twice, but I already knew what they meant. Richard wasn't done with me. The hearing was held downtown in a cramped chamber that smelled faintly of mildew, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Nova sent a young attorney who looked barely out of law school. He stumbled over basic terminology, butchered the phrase logistics systems, and waved papers he clearly didn't understand. When my turn came, I didn't raise my voice. I simply placed the black notebook on the table, slid forward a USB drive, and stacked printed logs and emails on top, each page marked with dates, timestamps, and server paths from my home machines. Proof the system had been born in my kitchen at 2 a.m., long before Nova ever touched it. The judge barely skimmed the first pages before shaking her head. No grounds for ownership. Case dismissed. The gavel cracked like the final punctuation on a story that had already ended. I walked out calm, but the anger stayed lodged inside me, sharper than relief. A week later, I got an email from Henry Winslow, Nova's counsel, asking to meet privately. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We sat in a dingy coffee shop where the mugs were chipped and the espresso tasted burned. Henry looked smaller than I remembered, his windbreaker wrinkled, his hands twitching around the cup. He kept his eyes down as he spoke. Back in 2018, you emailed me. Said you were developing new algorithms. Asked if Nova wanted to buy them formally. I took it to Richard. Henry's jaw clenched. He told me, just use it. We'll handle it later. He knew Emma. He knew all of it. My stomach turned. Henry's voice dropped. That lawsuit? He filed it knowing it wouldn't stick. It was optics. He just needed to make you look small. The truth hit like a stone. Richard's downfall hadn't been negligence. It had been theft, calculated and deliberate. But the collapse of Nova didn't leave me untouched. Every headline about plummeting stock and layoffs carried names I knew, people who had trusted the wrong leader. My phone buzzed at night with messages, some angry and blaming, most just afraid, asking if I knew where they could land. One night, I opened a blank spreadsheet and started filling in names: dispatchers, coders, warehouse managers, supervisors. I added skills, experience, strengths. By the end of the week, the list held more than 200 rows. I brought it to Michael and slid the laptop across his desk. We bring them in. Not all at once, piece by piece. This isn't charity. It's redemption. He studied the screen for a long time before nodding. Do it. We called it Operation Second Wind. Apex rolled out hiring and retraining programs, creating soft landings for those discarded by Nova. Within 3 months, we had absorbed over 150 former employees and opened 2 new branches just to handle the work they generated. The numbers were good, but the culture was better. Apex had become more than a logistics firm. It was a home for people rediscovering their worth. Months later, I stood on stage at an industry gala, a glass plaque heavy in my hands as they announced the National Innovator Award. The applause blurred into a hum as I leaned into the microphone. Innovation isn't just software, it's how you treat people. It's how you value the ones building the future under your roof. Afterward, at the edge of the crowd, I caught sight of Richard Grayson. His suit was wrinkled, his posture slumped, the confidence that once filled entire rooms drained from him. He didn't approach, just gave me a small, almost weary nod. I returned it, nothing more. Back at Apex, I started a quiet mentorship program, one-on-one sessions where I taught young engineers how to protect their work, read contracts carefully, and walk away the moment respect disappeared. Above my desk, I framed an article titled Nova's Fall, a case of talent lost. Taped to the corner was a note in Richard's handwriting, "You were never back, office." I never replied. I didn't need to. Apex Logistics didn't just win contracts, it reshaped the industry. Within a year of the Silver Ridge manufacturing deal, our routing system became the benchmark across North America. Reports in trade journals no longer compared us to Nova Freight, they compared everyone else to us. Europe came next, then South America, and by the time Asia signed on, I realized something extraordinary. The algorithms I once scribbled in the margins of a black notebook had grown into the backbone of global commerce. But the expansion wasn't just about numbers. Operation Second Wind had become part of Apex's DNA. At every branch opening, I met faces I remembered from Nova Freight, people who had once shuffled nervously in the hallways, afraid of Richard Grayson's dismissive smirk. Now they stood tall as department heads, project leads, innovators in their own right. In one branch, Lauren, once the receptionist pretending not to overhear my humiliation, was leading a client relations team with the kind of quiet authority Richard had never allowed her to show. In another, Jenna from operations had designed a scheduling tool that was saving Apex millions, and she ran her team with a fierceness that made me proud. I realized the true victory wasn't in Richard's downfall. It was in these moments, watching talent bloom where it had once been suffocated. Revenge had given me closure, but legacy was giving me peace. Still, growth brought new challenges. As Director of Systems Innovation, my role shifted. I wasn't coding every day anymore, but shaping strategy, choosing directions, and, most importantly, protecting people. I started a mentorship initiative quietly at first, one-on-one, teaching young engineers not just about algorithms, but about contracts, intellectual property, and the courage to walk away from toxic environments. Word spread, and soon the program became formal. Apex supported it fully, and I found myself standing in auditoriums filled with fresh talent, telling them not just how to optimize supply chains, but how to demand respect for their minds and their work. On the night Apex celebrated its first global summit, I stood on the balcony of our new headquarters in Denver. Below me, the city glittered with light, a reflection of the network we had built across continents. Michael Mercer joined me, his tone casual, but his words weighted. "This started with your notebook, Emma. And look at it now." I smiled, the cool night air carrying his words deeper than applause ever could. I thought of Michael, my late husband, and the nights he had told me, "Someday, they'll see what you've built." I whispered into the quiet, "They see it now." Later that evening, alone in my office, I opened the black notebook one last time. The ink was fading, the paper worn soft from years of being carried as armor. I traced the lines of the first diagram I had drawn, crude, but brilliant in its potential. Then I closed the cover slowly. I no longer needed it as proof, because the proof was all around me, teams thriving, contracts signed, and an industry forever changed. Nova Freight was gone, Richard Grayson reduced to a footnote in case studies about failure. Apex Logistics was alive, unstoppable, driven not by theft or arrogance, but by respect. And for the first time since I had walked into Richard's glass office asking for a 13% raise, I felt whole. Not just victorious. Whole,